The load shedding is a curse. Deadlines are met with laptops shutting down right before submission time. The bills keep rising. Darkness descends on the citizens of Karachi, and all fingers point towards one culprit, K Electric. And the question the citizens of Karachi have is, who will hold this culprit accountable?
Hello guys, my name is Zainab Asif and I'll be your host on today's episode of Crime Scene Economics. Today's episode is called Natural Monopoly of K Electric and the Murder of Economic Development. So I will begin by giving you guys some background on K Electric and the problem at hand. Pakistan's energy sector has been a huge subject of debate in recent years. This is mainly because of a rise in circular debt and consumer prices associated with this sector. A major area of controversy is K Electric's abuse of monopoly power and operational mismanagement. Despite receiving rupees 59.5 billion in government subsidy this year after the August 2020 flooding in Karachi that left the city's infrastructure devastated, so the questions we want to ask are, under what circumstances was this abuse and mismanagement allowed? And are these circumstances a necessary evil or can they be avoided? And what implications does this have for the development of our country? So now we have with us Amal Kazi, a senior associate at K Electric who specializes in economics to help us understand the situation better.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Zainab, for having me here. So, to answer your question, Zainab, we have to understand two very important contexts. Number one, what does being a natural monopoly entail? And number two, whether K Electric qualifies as a natural monopoly. So, simply put, the market structure of a natural monopoly is characterized by an industry where the efficient quantity of firms is one. So, generally, in theory, there are three distinguishing factors that differentiate a natural monopoly from other market structures. So the first characteristic is that the costs of starting up are high, and they are not only irreversible but also non-duplicable. Secondly, natural monopolies are characterized by powerful technical economies of scale due to being sole providers to a large market demand, which leads to lower average costs and greater scope for research and development. Thirdly, natural monopolies have high barriers to entry as a result of high sunk costs, which makes organic creation or market competition nearly impossible. So, having said that, we can easily conclude that K Electric does satisfy all of those conditions and therefore is a natural monopoly. It has a customer base of over 2.5 million. It is currently the sole provider of electricity in Karachi with 10,000 employees. It owns gas turbine plants and a transmission grid line, which shows us not only its high startup costs but also its large scale of production. K Electric's large scale of operations shows its scope for powerful economies of scale. Economies of scale is basically a per unit reduction in cost of production. In addition to that, it has technical barriers to entry due to its current scale of production, and it's the only vertically integrated power company in Pakistan that handles all three levels of production, which are generation, transmission, and distribution.
So now that we've understood the link between K Electric and national monopolies, let's welcome our second guest speaker, who is an expert with a PhD from Harvard Business School on Applied Microeconomics, Ms. Shazia Khalid.
Thank you for having me here, Zainab. It's an honor to speak on this issue.
So Shazia, tell us your take on K Electric as a national monopoly in Karachi.
Now, the major defect in monopolies is the allocative and productive inefficiency which is inherent to their structure. We can understand this set of inefficiencies a lot better if we compare them to the ideal market structure, which is perfect competition. On a simple price and quantity diagram, we see that perfectly competitive markets have a horizontal average and marginal revenue curve because they're price takers with no individual market control. This means that they're not only productively efficient because their price equals their marginal cost, but they're also allocatively efficient because their average cost and average revenue are the same where they produce. This is all stated assuming that these firms are rational. On the other hand, monopolies have a much steeper average and marginal revenue curve since they have a lot more control over price. This difference has three major implications. Firstly, monopolies do not operate at allocative or productive efficiency. Their price, marginal cost, average revenue, and cost are all different at their point of ideal production. Secondly, they earn supernormal profits that are gained by eating into consumer welfare. This is decreased by the shaded area represented here. And thirdly, they incur a deadweight loss onto society, represented by this shaded area here, which represents an untapped win win situation. To put it simply, someone could potentially be made better off without making someone else worse off. Hence, monopolies are also Pareto inefficient. Now, since Amal has established that K Electric is a natural monopoly, we can also apply these arguments of inefficiency to Karachi's energy infrastructure.
Well, Shazia, this trio of inefficiencies definitely makes a case against K Electric. But isn't it reductionist to assume that all monopolies make consumers worse off? Monopolies do have greater economies of scale that may benefit consumers. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up, Zainab, because it's an important criticism to address. Now, the alternate claim is that powerful economies of scale and large scale production mean that a natural monopoly's average cost curve drops massively. In this adjusted model, although there is a deadweight loss represented by this shaded area here, price can fall even lower than that of perfect competition.
So that's good. K Electric isn't all bad.
Not quite. Just because prices can fall due to lower costs and economies of scale does not mean that prices will actually fall. In the real world, producers operate in a complex mesh of political and social factors. For example, in September 2020, Karachi saw a per unit increase of 1.09 rupees. And then again in October, we saw an increase of 2.89 rupees. So prices didn't fall, but instead, consumers were forced to accept the price hike as it was simply because they had no other alternative.
So, what political factors have affected prices?
Well, firstly, 72.4% of K Electric is owned by Abraj Capital, which is a foreign private equity giant that has incentive to make profit, not to increase consumer welfare. Secondly, there is pressure from the federal government to decrease subsidy to K Electric. This is honestly all just a political game in retaliation to PPP writing off around 31 billion rupees worth of K Electric's debt just so that they can get a stronger foothold in Sindh. Let's also not forget that the IMF has been placing pressure on the Pakistani government to curb its circular debt, which means that the government has had to place more tariffs and decrease subsidies to power companies. And it is the citizens of Karachi who suffer the consequences of K Electric earning supernormal profits.
While your take on the political situation may be valid, I have to play the devil's advocate here. Isn't it justifiable for K Electric to earn supernormal profits? They're an energy company, and higher profits may lead to good research and development.
What you're talking about are Schumpeterian rents. It's essential for us to understand whether they're even valid in the case of K Electric. A rent is defined as an income earned which is higher than what a producer would have earned with their next best opportunity. Schumpeter basically said that in some cases, higher rents are efficient and necessary because they are an incentive for producer to innovate in the long run. So theoretically, if K Electric is earning supernormal profits, It's completely fine because in the long run, consumers will benefit from sustainable energy research and innovative electricity transmission. But practically, this argument simply does not hold. Schumpeterian rents operate under the assumption that a certain degree of open entry and exit exists in the market for entrepreneurs to be motivated to innovate. On the other hand, K Electric has extremely strong barriers of entry. The company is completely vertically integrated and they control all stages of production in Karachi. With no competition, there is almost no economic pressure for them to innovate technologically.
Even if there isn't economic pressure, wouldn't there be political pressure to innovate and increase consumer welfare?
Well, the political pressure is actually redirected into publicity stunts to improve company image. Just take a look at K Electric's website. On the awards section, instead of boasting about renewable energy research that they've done, the company speaks of goodwill blood donation drives that they've made to make themselves look better. Political influence means that higher rents may also be eaten up by diseconomies of scale, bureaucratic corruption, management costs, instead of being redirected to innovators. So, in reality, there is no justification for K Electric continuing to earn supernormal profits. Our discussion clearly shows exactly how K Electric's natural monopoly is harming the citizens of Karachi.
So, after exploring the general economic theories pertaining to the monopolies market that K Electric operates in, we should view these concepts from the perspective of the two development economists that will be our guest speakers today. So, without further ado, let's see what they have to say.
Thank you, Zainab, and hello everyone. My name is Amna Khalid. I've been enjoying this discussion on the case study of K Electric so far, and I'd like to contribute some of my thoughts as well on how this can lead to the failure of many development goals, especially applying the theories of economic development.
So, can you begin by telling our viewers what development economics is all about?
Yes, so as defined by Michael Todaro, development can aim to increase living standards, life-sustaining goods, and socio-economic choices available to the people. Sustainable development goals offer a broader collection of global objectives that specifically mention affordable and clean energy. So it's clear how K Electric seems to be failing here. But we can also explore more traditional areas where it becomes a hindrance, such as poverty reduction, industrialization, and economic growth. And these characteristically remain below par in less developed countries. For example, access to electricity is considered an indisputable right of individuals now. It's a factor measuring multidimensional poverty. Monopolistic markets cause a lack of affordability and access required to the usage of many wage earning activities, leading to lower productivity as well as frequent losses of income, which could have been helping in improving their affordability in the first place. Hence, they run into this vicious cycle of a productivity poverty trap.
So, do you believe that this problem primarily affects the poor?
Not necessarily. They may often have higher stakes in terms of falling below their survival needs, but electricity, as we know, is also crucial for industrial uses. In fact, total industrial output losses to power outages vary 12 to 37% each year, according to Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. And the gravity of the matter can also be seen from World Bank data of 2018, which reports that a lack of reliable access to electricity is estimated to cost the economy $5.8 billion each year. This is 2.6% of Pakistan's GDP. So developing industries and infrastructure has the potential to make agriculture-based economies like Pakistan specialize in higher value-added products, which can improve their terms of trade, balance of payments, and also average living standards. So this is why moving away from the subsistence rural sector towards the industrial sector is also a necessary structural change that a developing economy needs in order to grow, according to the Lewis two-sector model. And when we look at other theories of economic development, one approach is Rostow's linear stages of growth. And this theory suggests that all countries must go through such successive stages to progress from a traditional society to being in its preconditions for their takeoff stage, and then drive to maturity, and lastly, the age of high mass consumption. So this also sets structure for other models to develop, such as the Harry-Tadar model. And the main strategy in which is to save and invest any changes in capital stock back into the economy, which will ultimately lead to economic growth. And while theoretically these explanations make sense, but in reality, it underestimates many disruptions a developing country like Pakistan has to face, and one of which is poor institutional quality. So such plans can only be fruitful when they're augmented with complementarities like physical and economic infrastructure, including electricity, for the reasons we just discussed.
Thank you, Lamia, for this interesting outlook and insight into the theories of economic development. Now we have with us Fatma Binte Afzal, a development economist, who will be sharing an insight on how she thinks K Electric exploits its power of being a national monopoly.
Hello Zainab and Lamia, thank you so much for having me here. This is Fatma Binte Afzal and I just wanted to say I was in awe of every second where Shadia and Amal were discussing this issue at hand. The reason why I found this discussion particularly amusing was because I, having been a Karachi resident all my life and a developmental economist, was unable to see this issue at hand through this lens. The lens of how K Electric benefits and exploits its nature of being a natural monopoly. This gives rise to not only issues like its absolute inefficiency, insanely high prices, and operational mismanagement, but also, as Lamia just mentioned, causes hindrances in seeking some key developmental goals a society looks forward towards.
So can you elaborate on some of those development goals, specifically the barriers to achieving them?
Yeah, one such developmental goal I was thinking is the big push model, and K Electric is clearly inconsistent with it because it's a natural monopoly. The big push model is perhaps the most famous coordination failure model, pioneered by Paul Rosenthal-Rodan, who first raised some of the basic coordination issues in development economics. It is a concept in development economics or welfare economics that emphasizes that a firm's decision whether to industrialize or not depends on its expectation of what other firms will do. It assumes economies of scale and oligopolistic market structure and explains when industrialization would happen. Now, K Electric, being a natural monopoly, fails to be in line with this model, as the quick push model clearly requires multiple stakeholders investing and adjusting their adjustment based on expectation of others' action. But considering there is only one sole provider for this energy source, that is a basic need for every citizen, there is no incentive to improve, invest, or grow for KESA. This inconsistency is evident when we compare it to other energy markets in Pakistan. Outside Karachi, for example, WAPDA is not completely integrated and is actually in competition with PEPCO since 2007. K Electric's price rise has been much more than WAPDA, and there's been less effort for K Electric to invest in hydroelectric power. Another criticism over here could be how limited Pakistan's innovation is towards other renewable maybe energy resources like solar power or wind power, etc.
But there have been efforts made to rectify this, right? Government policies like subsidies and price caps can motivate a producer to innovate and invest.
True, but before we get into that, it's important to discuss something that we call the international dependence model. This model suggests a dependence and dominance relationship between poor countries and rich countries, under development due to historical evolution of an unequal international capitalistic system, or rich countries either exploit or are neglectful of developing countries. This view says that international system distorts things and does not allow the developing world to escape poverty. Let me show you what I exactly mean. Now, as I was saying, let's assume these are the rich countries and these are the poor countries. So what I'm trying to explain, the international dependence model, is basically this. The rich countries have a dominance relationship with the poor countries, and the poor countries have a very dependent relationship with the rich countries. First, there is this conditioning of the developing countries. They depend on the developed world. Second, the developed world has a way of leading things, but the developing world only expands on the reflection of the developed world. It's just tagging along. I agree, Zainab. There are ways to rectify the issue at hand, such as price caps imposed by the government. However, that comes with further issues when we consider how Pakistan, as a developing country, also heavily relies on the international dependence model. Now, price caps and subsidies cannot feasibly and freely be implemented in a status quo where the IMF has leverage over the government in the form of national debt to dictate policy. A policy where power companies face tariffs and subsidy cuts that will raise prices for the consumers, not cap. This is not an option considering a country that already faces multidimensional poverty on so many levels, just as Lamia mentioned. Moreover, market distortions and disproportionate control by the national monopolies like K Electric over citizens is to primarily maintain their power, as that reduces competition in the market and requires less investment as there is a lack of incentive to grow.
Yes, absolutely, Fatma. That gives clarity on how the issue is far more complicated than it seems. I, on the other hand, was thinking about how the discussion with Amal and Shajia highlighted many ways a monopoly leads to market failures and restricts economic growth. While K Electric is a private corporation, it receives billions in government subsidies every year. And another theory of economic development that can be brought in here is known as the neoclassical counter-revolution. It favors market fundamentalism without state regulation, as it argues that underdevelopment is caused by poor resource allocation that can be fixed by letting the free market correct pricing. However, since K Electric is a natural monopoly, like Amal explained, this means even in a free market, barriers to entry would still persist. So a case could be made of increasing state regulation instead, or adopting a market-friendly approach which recognizes the imperfections in the market of developing countries and how the government must step in to correct these to form balanced policies.
An additional developmental model that it is essential for us to look through is poverty traps. There are various types of traps that keep people stuck in the grueling cycle of poverty, and K Electric plays a part in contributing to each of them. Let's take a look at poverty in Pakistan and then analyze each of the poverty traps in turn. According to the Asian Development Bank, around 24.3% of Pakistan's population lived below the national poverty line of 3,000 rupees per month in 2015. Even recent statistics from the World Bank show that 2 in 5 Pakistanis face moderate to severe food insecurity. How does K Electric contribute to this? Let's find out. First, there's the illiteracy and information trap that disproportionately affects students from low income households. This is especially relevant to the pandemic. As schools have shifted online, it is the students without access to electricity that have suffered the most due to loss in education. If a child's parents cannot afford to install a generator during load shedding, the child loses out by being unable to submit assignments, unable to attend Zoom lectures, and even unable to function properly due to risk of heat stroke in hot weather. This class difference and subsequent deprivation doesn't just exist between institutions like public and private universities, but even within private universities, like LUMS, students on financial aid suffer due to load shedding in their homes. The second trap we look at is the debt trap. I mentioned earlier that K Electric saw a cumulative rise of 4 rupees per unit in September and October 2020. In response to this, the Pakistani government rolled out a law that stated that utility below a certain amount should not be collected by K Electric when they charge their bills. However, there are two problems with this policy. Low income households that have a huge family and thus have a higher bill are deprived of the benefits of this policy. And in some areas like North Karachi and Bahadrabad, K Electric actually added a surcharge to subsequent bills to make up for the loss. These families may have had to borrow to make up the deficit, and hence they are in a form of debt trap. The third trap we look at is the working capital trap. This is where small scale entrepreneurs cannot afford to buy a large inventory or they cannot afford the kind of capital that large industries may. We see in this slide that the extent of load shedding Karachi suffered was immense, and a large brunt of it was borne by industrial areas. Korangi Authority of Trade and Industry reported facing up to 11 hours of power cuts a day, which is detrimental to trades that require machinery. In this status quo, it is the small scale tailors, woodworkers, and crafters who suffer the most because, unlike large industrial names, they can't afford to install generators for 11 hours a day. This working capital trap also has a gendered aspect to it. Many low income women working from home through online methods such as teaching, Quran classes, small scale businesses are impacted even more because their household trades do not benefit from the kind of subsidies that the government gives to industrial areas. In light of this new information, it is crucial for the government to take on ground realities into account when creating developmental policy.
I'm glad you brought this up because this can move our discussion to now looking at some potential reforms and recommendations in more detail.
So, having established that the structure of K Electric's natural monopoly does more harm than good, we must now understand what can feasibly be done to rectify the situation. So, as early as the 1800s, John Stuart Mill advocated for increased government intervention in order to regulate monopolies for the public good. Typically, the avenues available for government intervention are nationalization, price caps, regulation of mergers, and quality control. So, partial nationalization of K Electric is being considered by the federal government in light of the August 2020 flooding. However, it is unlikely that significant action will be taken due to provincial party conflict. Price caps cannot feasibly be implemented in a context where the IMF has leverage over the government in the form of national debt. Quality control is a viable policy, and the Pakistani government is already engaging in it, not just for equity but also for efficiency purposes. However, quality control would require an immense administrative cost, which our government may not be able to incur. A policy that can be implemented is unbundling. This is where counter monopolies are encouraged and assisted in breaking through the barriers to entry, but at just one state of production. And the industry has to be exactly like K Electric, so it has to be perfectly vertically integrated natural monopoly. So this could take the form of the government assisting another privately owned enterprise to take over distribution and transmission of electricity while K Electric still manages generation. This process has already happened in 2007 with WAPTA, where its thermal plants were distributed among three generation companies, with WAPTA itself retaining its Hydel power generation and water distribution. We know that a natural monopoly has the potential to abuse its power because its demand curve is relatively inelastic. So, in theory, by introducing competition, the demand curve will become more elastic because K Electric will no longer be the sole provider of electricity. And this is supposed to basically bolster efficiency because K Electric will now be competing and will lose all its power in the market.
So now with our discussion coming to an end, I believe that we can all agree that irrefutable proof has come up about K Electric crimes. First, it is allocatively and productively inefficient and it incurs a huge deadweight loss onto society. Second, their higher rents are not justified even through the lens of innovation because it is inconsistent with ground reality. Third, K Electric's national monopoly existence is not just inconsistent with the big push model, but it is also a tool for international dependence which just furthers the interests of elites in developing countries. And lastly, K Electric prevents the healthy development of complementarities both practically and theoretically.
Is our suspect guilty? Can it be rehabilitated through adequate policies? Maybe if our recommendations are adopted, we will live in a world where we're able to submit our assignments on time, not haunted by increasing bills, and not afraid to turn the lights on.